Julia trudged slowly from the bus stop towards the office. It was early on a grey October morning. A biting wind whipped around her, and a persistent drizzle fell. The office building, where she had recently started as a cleaner, was in an industrial estate, a fair distance from the stop. Still, the pay was good and the work wasn't too demanding. She desperately needed the money. She would work for an hour or so before the staff arrived. Offices like this were much easier to manage than shops. Julia had once cleaned in a large shopping center. No sooner had she finished scrubbing a floor than someone would walk over it with dirty boots, and she would have to start all over again. Some people would even deliberately throw rubbish in front of her, as if to say, "That's your job, do it." It was disheartening and humiliating. But what choice did she have? She had to live and provide for her daughter, and she had no one else to rely on. It was just her and her little girl, a daughter named Vera, against the world. Sometimes she felt so miserable and alone. She didn't have a strong man's shoulder to lean on. She was all alone. She had never known the warmth of a parent's love herself. She saw how other people's parents were a source of support, even for adults. For instance, her neighbor could leave her children with their grandparents and go away for a weekend. The neighbor's parents would also give her treats and money and offer words of encouragement during tough times. It made everything easier when you knew you weren't alone. What would happen to Vera if something happened to her? She had no relatives who could care for her. Would she be sent to a children's home? Julia herself grew up in care and wanted to spare her daughter that fate at all costs. Most parents regret how quickly their children grow up, but Julia celebrated every one of her daughter's birthdays. Vera had recently turned 10 and was already in year 5 at school. She was a brilliant student. When she was 18, she would be an adult and, God forbid, if anything happened, she could fend for herself. But of course, Julia wanted to be with her daughter for as long as possible and give her all the love, care, support, and warmth that she herself never had. Vera was such a smart girl. Julia dreamed of her going to university. She knew she herself could have gone to university and had a more qualified job than a cleaner, but that's just how life went. Not everyone was lucky. As a former care leaver, Julia had worked several cleaning jobs, including 2 offices and a gym. She had to rush from one place to another with a mop in her hand for 10 hours a day, so she was exhausted by evening. Her back ached and her feet throbbed. But it was enough to live on and even to afford small luxuries like a few treats and new clothes for Vera. Julia loved dressing up her little princess. She didn't think about herself. Why would she want to attract men? She had had enough with her romance with Vera's father to know that personal happiness was not for her. Of course, she sometimes dreamed of a prince who would protect her and her daughter from the world's troubles, but she knew that such a person did not exist. Julia once tried working as a shop assistant. The work was easier and the pay better, but she quickly realized that she wasn't cut out for it. A shop assistant had to be quick-witted, bold, and able to convince people to buy things they didn't need. Julia couldn't do that. She had always been honest and straightforward. Once, her boss overheard her advising an elderly woman to buy cheaper tomatoes because the expensive ones, though beautiful, tasted awful. He sacked her on the spot. Julia continued with what she knew best: cleaning offices, shops, and stairwells. The locations changed, but the work remained the same. The journey to the office felt so long. All the office workers drove there in their own cars. Even the young lads and girls had their own vehicles. Julia saw them when she finished work and made her way back to the bus stop. As the company employees were just arriving, Julia would be walking in the opposite direction. She noticed one young woman in particular, who looked to be about 30, a similar age to herself. She drove a shiny red sports car, wore dark sunglasses, and had her hair down. She looked so elegant and stylish. Julia liked to fantasize about this woman's life, imagining herself in her place. It was her, Julia, sitting behind the wheel of a luxury car with the air conditioning on and her favorite music playing. She had a wealthy, handsome husband and loving parents who had given her a start in life. She was valued at work for her ability to write reports and plan things well. Just a dream. And she still had a long way to go to reach the building. Every morning, Julia had to wake up at 4:30 to take an hour-long bus ride across the city and then walk for half an hour from the stop to the office. She and her daughter lived on the outskirts of the city in a 5-story council block. As a care leaver, she had received a tiny one-bedroom flat. It had a small bedroom that also served as a living room, a 6 square meter kitchen, and a bathroom that was long overdue for renovation. The wooden floors creaked, but Julia was happy. After so many years of living in a shared room, she finally had a place of her own. Julia had turned it into a cozy little nest, a quiet haven where she could escape from life's hardships. Here, she felt safe and at peace. She finally had a home. While still in care, Julia enrolled in a vocational college, where she chose to study to be a chef and pastry chef. She had always loved learning. Her teachers said she had an excellent memory and a talent for maths. Of course, a university education was out of the question. She urgently needed a practical trade. After leaving care, she had only a year left of college. And then, a dream job, a job that would guarantee she'd never go hungry. Julia was an excellent student and was on track to get a distinction. She had only 1 year left. She lived on her student grant and worked as a part-time street cleaner. But her career plans were not to be. She met Maxwell, a fun-loving man who at first seemed kind and reliable. He was in the same college, but a year ahead, and in a different, more promising field, food technology. He often reminded her of this. After college, Maxwell planned to join the army and then go to university. "My uncle is the head of the sales department at a milk factory, and he'll give me a good job," Maxwell said, and Julia listened, thinking this was her chance at happiness. Maxwell was a real man. He thought about the future and had so many prospects. He was also so smart, and his reasoning was so sound. With him, she would be just fine. Julia and Maxwell often passed each other in the college corridors, but they didn't pay much attention to each other at first. Julia had been attracted to him for a while. He was so lively, witty, and sociable, always surrounded by friends. Then one day, she met him at a party. A friend from her class was celebrating her birthday at a country cottage, and Maxwell was one of the guests. By then, Julia had left care and was living in her new flat. She felt happy, grown up, and independent. The feeling made her giddy, creating the illusion that the world was hers. Maxwell was, as always, the center of attention. Many girls tried to flirt with him, but he just laughed and joked with them. Julia laughed heartily at his jokes and even exchanged a few words with the local celebrity. He paid attention to her and even agreed with her opinion, supporting her in the conversation. Then, something incredible happened. It was evening and everyone was having fun in the cottage they had rented for the weekend. Suddenly, Julia felt stuffy and wanted to get some fresh air. She wanted to enjoy the evening coolness and the quiet of the pine forest. She had no intention of wandering too far away. She decided to go down to the lake and sit on the shore, listening to the crickets and looking at the big, bright, and very close-looking stars. You couldn't see stars like that in the city. She went down a rickety wooden staircase to the water. There was a dilapidated wooden bench there that was still warm from the sun. It was so nice to sit on it and watch the ripples on the surface of the lake and the mesmerizing moonlit bath. Then he came. Maxwell sat down next to her without saying a word. Julia looked at him in surprise, but he just smiled a charming smile and broke the silence. "Don't mind some company?" "Do you even have to ask?" Julia thought. Of course, she was happy to have him there. Maxwell himself had sought her out, a simple girl. He was surrounded by 100 beautiful girls from college, yet he was sitting here with her. Enjoying the party, he asked. "It's fun there," Julia said, "but I like it here better. I've never seen such big stars before." "Have you never been out of the city?" "I have, of course," Julia replied. "The children's home sent us to summer camps every year, but we had to go to bed early there." So, this was the first time she was truly enjoying the starry sky, untouched by the city lights. "It is beautiful," Maxwell agreed, looking up at the sky. "But you know what's even more beautiful?" Julia shook her head. "You," he said, looking straight into her eyes. It wasn't the first compliment Julia had ever received. Since she was a child, her carers had told her she was a pretty girl, but hearing it from a popular guy like Maxwell was completely different. Julia's head was spinning. Could he really like her? "I've been watching you for a while," he continued. "You're very beautiful and you're so modest, not like the others. I finally got the courage to tell you." Julia couldn't believe her ears. He liked her all this time, but he was too shy to tell her? She couldn't have imagined that he was so good at hiding his feelings. I'm tired of those painted dolls all looking the same, Maxwell continued. But you are real. You're not like everyone else. That's why I'm so drawn to you. I don't even know what to say, Julia said honestly. But her eyes shone with genuine happiness. Maxwell understood without her having to say anything more. He carefully and gently put his arm around her shoulders, looked into her eyes, made sure she wasn't against it, and kissed her. Julia had just turned 18, but this was her first kiss. Unlike the other girls from Cairn College, she had not been in a rush to grow up or date boys. But now, at that moment, Julia felt truly happy, loved and wanted. The one-of-a-kind Maxwell was with her. He radiated warmth and affection. Tears welled up in her eyes. It was so nice to feel like the source of such strong feelings. No one had ever been this interested in her before. And now there was him. "Let's be a couple," Maxwell simply suggested. "Yes," Julia replied without hesitation. Her heart was singing. It felt like her life was about to turn around and everything would finally be okay. No more lonely nights or longing for a soulmate. Later, she would find out from mutual friends what had really attracted Maxwell. Her flat, where he could have parties and live without his parents' lectures and control. The boy knew that she was from Care and had been given her own place, which was why he had come into her life at that exact moment. He wanted his freedom from his parents, who were always demanding things from him. Everything worked out just as he had planned. Maxwell moved into Julia's flat, and his friends were always there. The neighbors glared at them. No one liked the loud parties he threw, but Julia ignored them. Her happiness blinded her. Maxwell was caring and attentive at first. He brought her flowers and gave her compliments. He praised her cooking. After a big party, he would always clean the flat, get the bottles from behind the radiator, scrub the floors, and empty the ashtrays. He showed Julia his favorite films. She didn't like them at all, but she pretended to be impressed to make him happy. They went for long walks and laughed a lot. Sometimes Maxwell went away on family business, to visit relatives in another town or to the coast with his mum. During those times, Julia felt lonely and miserable again. He hadn't introduced her to his parents yet. He said it was too early. "Mum doesn't want me to get married until I'm 25. She says I'll have family problems and won't have the time or energy for university. She wants me to be a success." Julia understood and accepted his rules. She was so happy. 6 months went by when Julia realized something wasn't right. The morning sickness and a missed period all pointed to one thing. She was pregnant. Maxwell had been careful, but something must have gone wrong. A test from the chemists confirmed her suspicions. Julia looked at the 2 lines and felt a mix of emotions. The main one was joy. She was going to have a baby, a little person of her own, a son or a daughter. It was wonderful. A warm feeling spread in her chest, making her feel so light and happy. But she also had a bad feeling that things might not be as rosy as they seemed. Maxwell was finishing college and was going into the army in the spring. She still had a year of college left, and it would be a very important year, full of exams and practice. How could she manage all that with a big belly and then a baby in her arms? She also hoped Maxwell would be happy about becoming a father, but something told her he wasn't ready for it. He had often talked about his plans, and they were all about the army, university, and a career. He had never once mentioned children. Julia waited for a long time before she told him that they were going to have a baby. She had already decided that she would have the baby no matter what. She needed a family of her own. And here was her baby, already living under her heart. She wouldn't give up this gift for anything. One day, Julia found the right time. She and Maxwell were lying on the sofa watching a film. He was drinking beer and eating crisps, which he offered to Julia, but she refused. "Maxwell, we're going to have a baby." She had thought for a long time about how to start the conversation and had decided to just say it, straight out. He choked on his crisps. "Are you sure?" he asked, coughing. "There's no mistake. We were careful. So how did this happen? 3 tests showed 2 lines. I don't believe this." Maxwell sat up abruptly and put his hand to his head. What a mess. The word mess stung Julia. Their baby wasn't a mess. Okay, Maxwell continued, coming to his senses. "No worries. I'll find the money. We'll go to a private clinic and have a quick termination. There won't even be a record in your file. I'll call Anthony. He was in a similar situation last year. No, sai pa niento, Julia objected. She was hurt that her hopes had not been fulfilled. Maxwell didn't want to be a father, but she had a strong desire to be a mother, and that was enough for her. What do you mean, no? Maxwell said. Don't you understand what you're saying? He went crazy. Julia looked at his scared and angry face and couldn't understand what had ever attracted her to this weak and hysterical man. Had she really once thought he was reliable and charming? I understand perfectly, she said, shaking her head. For some reason, she felt much more mature than Maxwell, even though he was a year older. I doubt it, he said. How are you going to finish college? What are you going to feed it with? Don't count on me. I'm against it. If you try to take me to court, you'll be in big trouble. My godmother works in the courts, so I'm all set. Julia listened in silence. She knew that Maxwell and his parents had connections everywhere. She knew that she would have to be alone again. But now she wouldn't be alone. She would have her baby. At the thought of her baby, Julia smiled. What are you so happy about? Maxwell was surprised. What's so funny about this situation? You're so funny when you're angry, Julia burst out laughing. You're crazy, Maxwell concluded. He opened the wardrobe and quickly put his things in his rucksack. I don't want to stay here another minute. Julia felt the same way. It was good that he had decided to leave on his own. She wouldn't have to kick this traitor out herself. But after he left, she was alone in her flat and couldn't stop herself from crying. Of course, Julia knew it would be difficult, but she would do everything for her baby. Maxwell would call her and come up to her at college again and again. He would try to convince her to terminate the pregnancy, promising her money and threatening her. He would paint a bleak picture of her future as a single mother. She tried to avoid her ex-boyfriend in every way she could. It was a good thing he was finishing college soon and going into the army for a year. It would be easier without him. The summer holidays came, and Julia took her exams. Her belly wasn't showing yet, so no one suspected she was pregnant. But by summer, it was obvious. She had to buy new clothes. At a late summer scan, the sonographer told her she was having a girl. Julia looked at the screen and cried tears of joy. She could clearly see her daughter's profile, a button nose, and a prominent forehead. It was a miracle. The baby is healthy, and you're due on October 15th, the sonographer said indifferently. October 15th. So much to do before then. Julia needed money, so she got an official job with the local council. Now, she wasn't just a street cleaner. She also cleaned stairwells. The pay was a little higher, but the work was much harder. It was a struggle for her to do the physical labor, but what else could she do? She was lucky they even hired her. She had carefully hidden her pregnant belly with a loose-fitting blouse during the interview. Of course, the manager later told her off. You got a job while you were pregnant. Now you'll take sick leave and then go on maternity leave. Do you know that you've let us down? All you care leavers are so cunning and sly. Julia didn't say anything. She knew it was wrong to hide her pregnancy, but she had no choice. She didn't even need sick leave. Her pregnancy went surprisingly well. She went on maternity leave when she was supposed to, and then she kept cleaning on the side to save up as much money as she could for her daughter's birth. Julia was well prepared for her daughter's arrival. She bought a second-hand cot, pushchair, and baby clothes. She didn't have the money to buy new things, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she would soon have a daughter, the only person she had in this cold world. For her, Julia would move mountains, and everything would be all right. The girl was born on October 15th. Vera immediately let out a loud cry, which earned her a stream of compliments from the midwife. What a strong, healthy little girl. She's so loud. What a beautiful girl. Julia had decided to name the girl Vera, as a symbol of her faith in a happy life. She held her daughter close and looked at her wrinkly red face. The new mother's cheeks were wet with tears. She couldn't control her emotions. Now that she had her own child, she understood even less how her parents could have given her up. Did those people live somewhere in peace, knowing that they had just abandoned her at a train station? Julia had only vague memories of her early childhood. She sometimes dreamed about it. But it was all hazy. It made sense. She was only 3 when a police officer found her, scared and cold, at a train station. She still remembered that moment. She was alone in a crowd of people all rushing somewhere. A train was blowing its whistle loudly nearby. She was terrified and very hungry. For some reason, of all the things, Julia remembered a pack of stray dogs that ran by. They were big, dirty, and their fur was matted, but she wasn't afraid of them. She was afraid of being alone. Before that, there had been people with her grown-ups, her parents, probably. They had travelled on trains together, rushed somewhere, sat on cold, dark staircases where people went up and down. Sometimes, someone would throw a coin into the box next to Julia. She still remembered that small detail, the sound of the coin hitting the bottom. As she got older, she realized that her parents were probably begging. But why? What happened? Why didn't they work? And why did they look like Romani people? Julia did not look like one. With her light brown hair and blue eyes, she looked British. The police tried to find her parents, but the investigation came to nothing. At 3.5 years old, Julia became a resident of a children's home. The only things she had left from her family were her name and a silver key pendant on a simple wax cord. She had been wearing the pendant when she was found at the train station. Julia knew her name very well, even at 3, and confidently told it to the police officer. But, unfortunately, she couldn't remember her surname or address. She also couldn't remember her parents' names. She tried to, but nothing came to her. She had once known their names, but she must have partially lost her memory from the stress. The trauma also took a toll on the little girl's condition. In an unfamiliar environment, Julia suddenly stopped speaking as if she had been struck dumb. Psychologists and speech therapists tried to help her, but nothing worked. In the end, they gave up on the child and diagnosed her with a learning disability. This scared away potential adoptive parents. Almost 10 years later, Julia recovered, and her speech returned, but it was too late. Teenagers were not of interest to adoptive parents. They preferred children under 7. Julia was in a special needs class until year 7. After she started speaking again, it turned out she was a very gifted girl who spoke well and could solve complex maths problems. The teachers and carers were surprised, but there was nothing they could do. The girl was talented, but the opportunity had been missed. After year 11, the administration sent Julia to a catering college. "You're a clever girl," said Catherine, the head of the children's home. "You'll finish college and then you can go on to university if you want to. You'll at least have a proper trade and won't go hungry." Julia agreed with her. She was standing in Catherine's office, nervously playing with her necklace, the one from her past that she barely remembered. Julia treasured it as the only link between her and her family. She was sure a loving parent must have put the pendant on her. It must have been given to her by someone who loved her, because you don't give a gift like that to a child you don't care about. Julia had pleasant feelings connected to the pendant. She thought she had asked someone to buy it for her. The little girl had liked the key on the cord and had begged for it. But who was it? A tall, kind person whose face was a blur. Was it her mum, her dad, an uncle, a family friend? It was hard to live without roots and with no information about her relatives. Who was she? Where was she from? What was her childhood like? Did she have any siblings? What had happened to her? And why did her parents abandon her at the train station? As a teenager, Julia came up with the most incredible stories to explain it. Sometimes she would imagine that her parents were being hunted by gangsters who wanted to steal her powerful father's business, and so they had left her at the train station to save her. Other times, she would imagine that she had been taken by a group of Romani people to beg. This was the version the police also investigated for a time. Julia didn't want to think that she was the daughter of 2 low-life alcoholics who simply didn't want a child, even though that was the most likely scenario. "There are so many of you poor things," one of the carers would say, looking at Julia. "I have a lot of experience, and in almost all cases where babies are found at train stations or in markets, their parents are scumbags. You're lucky you're alive. You could have fallen onto the tracks and been hit by a train, or dogs could have dragged you away. Those things happen. You're probably just like the other kids. The parents only need you for benefits, so they have money to buy alcohol. When the money runs out, they remember their parental duty and come crawling back for their kids. The children are just a burden in those families. You're better off in a public place. Your mom is probably like that too, and your dad might not even know you exist." At first, the little girl didn't believe that her parents could be low lives, but as she got older, she realized it was a possibility. But the silver pendant, such a beautiful and delicate thing. The lowlives who would come to the children's home could never have chosen a piece of jewelry like that for their child. Julia cherished the pendant and even slept with it around her neck. Once, when she was in year 4, she realized the pendant was gone. She hadn't been speaking yet, but she had a terrible breakdown. Julia still remembered the despair that overwhelmed her. It felt like her hope for the future, for meeting her parents, and for a happy life was gone along with the pendant. She screamed and cried and had convulsions. When she ran out of strength, she just sat in a corner, rocking back and forth and whimpering. One of the carers realized what had happened. While the doctors and teachers were trying to calm her down, she rushed to the gym, where Julia's class had been that day, and found the pendant. It had fallen into a crack between the mats. When Julia saw it, she immediately started smiling. Her tears dried, and a happy look appeared on her face. She gave the kind carer a big hug. The staff sighed with relief. The problem had been solved. It was a shame that not all the staff at the children's home were as caring as that young teacher. During her time in care, Julia had to endure a lot: insults and humiliation from adults, bullying from other kids, and even beatings. She put up with it all and waited for the day she would leave, the day she would finally be free and independent. And now, something she had never even dreamed of had happened. She had a daughter, her own child. For her sake, she had to drop out of college. Julia had to earn money and look after her baby. There would be time for an education later. Now, the most important thing was her daughter, who was so beautiful and helpless. Next to her, Julia felt so grown up and strong. Vera would have a real childhood, with birthdays, walks in the park with her mum, beautiful dresses, and her own toys. Julia would do everything to make it happen. The young mother worked hard and gave all her free time to her daughter. Vera grew up to be a healthy and smart girl. She returned her mother's love and care. She learned to cook at 7, and she had known how to clean since she was in nursery. The little girl saw how hard her mother worked and tried to help her with everything she could. She also did well in school. Vera didn't have to be forced to do her homework. Receiving a B was rare in her report card. Maxwell had never once asked about the baby, and Julia didn't expect him to. She had stopped believing in miracles. She once saw Vera's father at a shopping center. He was walking with a pretty girl, with his classic, charming smile, looking at his girlfriend with fascination. It was all so familiar. A young Julia had once fallen head over heels for his charm. Now he was a traitor and a coward. Julia felt sorry for the pretty girl. Of course, Julia knew that the time would come when Vera would ask her questions about her father, and she had no idea what to say. She didn't want to lie. But she also knew what it was like to live without knowing anything about your parents. Her daughter was lucky to have her, but it was important for Vera to know about her father too. It was also complicated. Julia hoped her daughter would not bring up that serious conversation for a long time. Julia finally reached the office building. The security guard, a man in his 40s, opened the door for her. He always smiled and winked at the young cleaner when she came to work. She never reacted to his flirting. She had too many problems and things to do. She had no time for romance, nor did she want any. The building was, as always, quiet and dimly lit. The staff were probably still waking up and getting ready for work. Before they arrived, she had to mop the floors in the corridors and offices. The storage room for the equipment and her uniform was under the stairs. Julia went in, put on her overalls, put her hair in a headscarf, and looked at herself in the mirror. She wasn't even 30 yet, but her eyes looked so tired, with dark circles under them. She had to do something about that. Maybe she should buy some face cream. A familiar piece of jewelry shimmered on her neck. It was her favorite piece of jewelry, that silver key from her past. She still wore the pendant as a lucky charm. She felt like the little key protected her from all evil and misfortune. If only she knew who had given it to her. Would it forever remain a mystery? Julia smiled at her reflection, took the bucket and mop, and went to the top floor. She always started cleaning from the top. Victor was in his office, working on another report that his accountant had brought to him for his signature. He liked the numbers. His construction company was thriving. The profits were steadily growing, and the number of clients was increasing. Everything was going well, and that was great. "Would you like some coffee, Mr. Shaw?" his secretary Jessica asked, poking her head into the office. She was a nice girl, the daughter of his old school friend. She couldn't find a job after university, so his friend had asked him to help her out. Victor couldn't say no. He was often asked for favors like that by his friends and acquaintances. He himself had young children. Well, not so young anymore. His son Timothy was in year 8 and his daughter Grace was finishing year 5. They were wonderful, good-looking kids. His wife Christine didn't work. After the birth of their first child, she had dedicated herself to their children. She took them to after-school clubs from a young age. His son played hockey and his daughter did gymnastics. All of that, of course, required a lot of time, money, and effort. When it came to money, Victor provided for the family completely. All the rest was on Christine's shoulders, and the results were impressive. From time to time, his wife invited him to competitions and tournaments where the children always did well. He was proud of Timothy and Grace and loved them and his young wife very much. A business, financial stability, a big cozy house, a loving family, and a clever and beautiful wife who was always understanding and never caused a fuss, always supporting him. What more could he want? But Victor couldn't say he was happy. There was a pain in his soul that would never go away, and he knew it. Victor had had a completely different life once. He had been a regular factory worker and was happy with his salary, which was not much more than the average wage in their provincial town. But back then, he was proud of himself and was carefree and happy. He couldn't afford a new car or a holiday abroad like he could now. He was paying off a loan for a new fridge and would only take his wife to a restaurant for special occasions. It wasn't Christine. He was married to his neighbor Kate. But despite all that, he felt much happier then than he did now, as a successful businessman and father of 2 amazing children. Jessica came into the office with a steaming cup of coffee. She was tall, slim, and blonde, with bright blue eyes, so much like... It was better not to think about her. It was too painful, too hard. Victor had spent so much time and money on a therapist. For a while, it helped. But the pain and memories always came back. He just had to learn to live with it. Sometimes Victor succeeded. He had so much work and so many things to do every day. The company demanded a lot of his time and attention. His children gave him so much joy. His beautiful, loving wife distracted him with talks about the future. It was so nice to make plans and dream with her. In all this hustle and bustle, the difficult thoughts would disappear for a while. But as soon as he stopped for a moment or saw something that reminded him of those times, something small and insignificant, the nightmare would return with a new force. Like now. Jessica had just brought him coffee, and her beautiful blue eyes shone brightly in the afternoon sun. Victor immediately thought of another pair of eyes, curious, loving, wide, and just as blue. They were the eyes of his older daughter, the little girl who was older than Jessica now. He had last seen her when she was 3. Now, she would be 29. Every year, Victor would mentally blow out the candles on her birthday cake and knew her exact age. He was sure she was alive somewhere, perhaps with a different name and surname. The facts said the opposite, but he just felt that she was alive. The only thing was, he would probably never find her. He had tried then, and he had tried for years after, but there was no trace of her. Guilt and a feeling of an irreplaceable loss had become his constant companions. After what had happened, he was never truly happy. Victor could pinpoint the exact day he had last felt calm and relaxed. It was the day his daughter went missing. It was a Sunday, his day off. He decided to let Kate rest for a little while. Julia and I are going to the ponds to feed the swans, and you can get some rest. You're always complaining about how tired you are, he had told his wife. That's wonderful, Kate had said, genuinely happy. The weather is beautiful. She shouldn't have to stay home all day. I'll cook something nice while you're gone. Is that what you call resting? Victor had joked. He was in high spirits. He was proud of his new role as a young father and always enjoyed taking his daughter out. He loved making her happy, and it was so easy when she was 3 years old. Julia would be amazed by the most ordinary things and thought her dad was a magician. It was a great feeling. I'll have time to rest and cook, Kate had said. Cooking for my loved ones is a real pleasure. Victor hugged his wife. They had known each other since childhood. They had played in the same sandbox as children and had gone to the same school. Victor couldn't even remember a time before Kate. She had always been there, a reliable and understanding person. When Julia was born, their family was finally complete. Victor remembered picking his wife and daughter up from the hospital with his family and friends. He held a huge bouquet of roses and was so nervous for some reason. Finally, Kate appeared at the door with a tight bundle tied with a puffy pink ribbon. Victor pulled the corner of the blanket back and was amazed. The little girl was fast asleep. Her chubby cheeks had thick dark eyelashes, just like his. As a child, he had always been teased for having such long eyelashes, which some girl was missing out on. Now, he saw the same eyelashes on his daughter. There was another resemblance too, a tiny birthmark above her upper lip. He still remembered how he felt at that first meeting. A warm wave of love and tenderness washed over him. He wanted to be a reliable protector for this helpless baby. With him and Kate, their daughter would be happy. He would give her everything she needed for a carefree childhood. He would shield her from all the hardships of life and fill her every day with joy. Victor no longer remembered that he had once dreamed of having a son. This girl, this cute baby, had instantly become the center of his world. He could barely hold back his tears. He wasn't going to cry in front of everyone. But Kate knew what was happening to her husband. She looked at him and smiled. Later, when Timothy and Grace were born, Victor did not feel the same way. Of course, he was happy to have a son and a daughter, but he didn't feel like his world had been turned upside down. Maybe it was because he was older and more established. With a painful past, or maybe the novelty was gone, unlike with his first child. In any case, Victor was much calmer about the birth of his younger children than he was about the birth of Julia. He himself had chosen the name for his first daughter, Julia, and Kate had agreed. They had taken care of the newborn together and watched her develop with joy and surprise. They were so proud of her achievements. "She's evolving," Victor had shouted with delight when she first stood up on her shaky legs in her cot. And how happy they were when she took her first steps. Her first solid foods, her first vaccination, a new hairstyle, everything was a huge event for the loving parents. And then Julia started talking before she was even a year and a half old. The first word she said was "Daddy." He was so proud and happy. He wanted to tell everyone that his beloved daughter was now calling him Daddy. Someone had told him that if a first child's first word was Daddy, then the next child would be a son. On the one hand, Victor dreamed of having a son, but on the other, he would have to share the attention he was giving his beloved daughter with another child. No, it was too early for that. Let Julia be their only princess for a while longer. The girl grew up fast. 3 years had passed since Victor had picked his daughter up from the hospital. He would remember her 3rd birthday forever, because the next time he would only be mentally blowing out the candles on her cake. On her 4th birthday, guests had come to their flat, grandparents from both sides, Victor's brother with his daughters, and Kate's sister with her sons. It was loud and fun. Julia was so happy with the party and her presence. She hugged everyone, laughed, and played with her cousins. Victor watched his princess and was again amazed at how much she looked like him when he was a child. He wasn't the only one who noticed it. Julia was, without a doubt, a favorite with everyone, not just because she was the youngest. She was just one of those genuine, kind children who created a special aura of joy and lightness around them. They made everyone around them feel better and kinder. Julia was just like that, an open, happy, and trusting girl, a gift, not a child. Sometimes, when Victor listened to his colleagues and friends talking about their children, he envied himself. He was so lucky to have such a wonderful daughter and wife. He was enjoying his happiness and mentally thanking fate for it. But everything changed on that sunny May day when Victor decided to take his daughter to the ponds. The ponds were in a beautiful park not far from their town, just one stop by train or half an hour by car. But Victor didn't have a car yet, so they decided to travel by train. The park had everything for a great family day out. Beautiful nature, rides, lots of cafes with delicious ice cream, and of course the ponds, several large artificial lakes with swans that children and adults loved to feed. That morning, Kate had dressed their daughter in a new, comfortable tracksuit and had braided her hair beautifully. The little girl looked like a doll, a modern and very trendy doll. Victor loved walking along, holding hands with the beautiful little girl. He noticed people looking at them. They looked so wonderful together, a tall, handsome father and his charming little daughter. They were in a wonderful mood. They walked for a couple of stops to the station. They could have waited for the bus, but the weather was so lovely that they didn't want to ride in a stuffy, dusty, crowded bus. At the station, Victor bought a ticket for himself. Children under 7 didn't need to pay. They had 15 minutes until the train arrived, so they decided to check out the shops. In one of them, they bought a hot dog and a bottle of water. "This is so good," Julia said, with her mouth full. "I know," Victor said, "but it's not very good for you. We won't make it a habit, but it's okay for once." After their snack, they continued to look at the shops. There was a toy stall somewhere around there. It sold cheap stuff, but Julia was always so happy with a new doll or a ball from there. So Victor was looking for the stall. He wanted to make his daughter happy. Suddenly, Julia noticed a beautiful, shiny sign for a jewelry shop. She had recently realized she was a girl and had started to like her mum's makeup and jewelry. She had even poured a whole bottle of her mum's expensive perfume on her top, and she had been begging her parents to let her get her ears pierced so she could wear earrings, like her friend at nursery. The young fashionista could not pass up a shop like this. Victor smiled and followed her, looking at all the sparkly things. Julia kept gasping in amazement, which made the saleswoman laugh. "I want this," she said, pointing to a chunky bracelet with brightly colored stones. "No, this is better," she said, her attention now on a lacy tiara. Victor knew they wouldn't leave empty-handed, but what would suit a little girl like Julia? He couldn't buy her a ring with an amber stone. The saleswoman helped them. She took out a box with small, light pendants, some silver and some gold, with stones and without, and most importantly, they were in the shape of bears, hearts and ballerinas. Perfect for a child. Julia eagerly looked at all the wonderful things. She didn't know what to choose at first, but then she confidently picked a thin, elegant, lightweight key. Victor noted that his daughter was developing good taste. "That's an excellent choice," the saleswoman said with a smile. "It's silver. I'll find a cord for it so you can wear it around your neck." Julia left the shop a happy girl. She thanked her dad and the saleswoman 1,000 times. And now, as she walked on the platform, she had a cord with a silver key around her neck. The girl carried herself like a proper young lady. Victor was amazed. It seemed like women's love for jewelry was in their blood, if a simple silver pendant could make a little girl so happy. Victor and Julia had a wonderful time at the ponds. They fed the swans, went on the rides, and ate ice cream and pizza. The sociable Julia had made new friends and had spent hours playing with the other children on the playground. Time flew by, and it was time to go home. The train was coming. Julia said goodbye to the boys and girls she had had so much fun with, took her father's hand, and obediently walked with him to the station. In the crowd of people, Victor immediately noticed 3 young men, about 20 years old. They were loud and arrogant, swearing without any shame, even with children around. No one dared to say anything to them. It was not worth it. Victor also kept quiet. It was better to stay away from people like that. He didn't want to get into a fight in front of Julia. He couldn't let his daughter go through that. So, Victor wisely walked away from them. Unfortunately, the 3 men got on the same carriage as them. On the train, they continued to act loud and arrogant. They were in a different part of the carriage but didn't miss a chance to annoy the other passengers. People tried not to respond. Everyone knew that would only lead to a more dangerous confrontation. Victor looked at the fields and forests passing by. The sun was setting. Julia was tired from the walk and the excitement and was dozing off. She was so sweet, so helpless. Victor smiled as he looked at his daughter. He was not going to wake her up when the train arrived. He would carefully pick her up and carry her home as he had done many times before. She was still so small and so light like a feather. He couldn't believe this little button would one day turn into a grown-up woman. She would surely be a real beauty with those big blue eyes. He felt like having a cigarette. He would have to go to the space between the carriages. Since his daughter was asleep, he could take advantage of the situation. He covered her with his jacket. He didn't know at that moment that it would be the last time he would do that. It seemed like he would only be gone for a couple of minutes. What could possibly happen in such a short amount of time? The steady clatter of the wheels was calming. It brought back memories of his own childhood when he, just like Julia, would ride on the train with his father, not to a park, but to his grandparents' cottage in the countryside. And now he was a father himself. The door suddenly opened. The 3 young men who had been making a racket on the platform and in the carriage came out. Victor tensed up. Something told him that this wasn't just a coincidence. Nothing good was going to happen. One of the men asked him for a cigarette. Victor didn't object and gave them 3. "Much obliged," the leader, a man in his 30s, said with an exaggerated bow. Victor nodded and was about to leave, but the leader blocked his way. "Hold on," he said. "We saw you at the station. You have a lot of cash in your wallet. Share it with us, like a brother." Victor knew he was in trouble now. Should he give them the money? What would happen if he did? How would his family live for the rest of the month? Or should he fight them? The odds weren't in his favor, and there would be a commotion which would scare Julia. While Victor was thinking, the leader decided for him. He punched Victor in the jaw. Victor saw flashes of light in front of his eyes and his head started spinning. He reacted on instinct. Victor had been in a boxing club from age 10 to 16. His left hook was excellent. The man fell back and almost fell, but the other 2 jumped on Victor. Blows rained down on him from all sides. They were hitting him in the head, kicking him in the back and in the stomach. He couldn't stay on his feet and slid down to the cold, dirty floor of the train. He tried to cover his head with his hands, but the men's feet and fists still found their targets. At some point, Victor knew he was going to black out. His ears started ringing and his eyes went black. He fell into a terrifying but safe darkness where there was no pain or fear. Victor woke up in a hospital. He opened his eyes and then closed them again. The white walls and furniture, along with the bright sunlight coming through the open window, blinded him and gave him a headache. He was in a hospital room. His whole body ached as if he had been hit by a train. Maybe he had been. The last thing he remembered was the punches from all sides and the unbearable pain. What happened to him? How did he end up here? A nurse came into the room pushing a drip. When she saw that he was awake, she smiled warmly. "You're a brave man. You pulled through. You were in very serious condition. No one thought you would make it." What happened to me?" Victor was surprised by how weak his voice was. Moving his lips was also painful. "You were attacked and beaten in the space between the carriages. They stole all your money and then threw you off the moving train. It's a miracle you survived. My daughter, I had a little girl with me." A chilling fear suddenly gripped Victor's heart. The pain and horror of what had happened to him faded. The only thing that mattered was finding out where Julia was. The nurse looked down. "You can talk to your wife about that later. Right now, you just need to rest and regain your strength. You have serious injuries." "Please, call my wife," Victor demanded. He had to know about Julia's fate. "I'll call her and tell her you're awake," the nurse promised. "Visiting hours are from 4 to 7. She'll be here." "Why?" he asked. The nurse had said his wife would be allowed to see him, even though visitors weren't allowed in intensive care. "This is a special case," she answered vaguely. Victor barely waited for Kate to arrive. He was tortured by the uncertainty and made up stories in his head. Julia woke up and didn't see her dad. She must have cried, which attracted the conductor's attention, and she took her to the police. They found Kate, and she took the girl home. Oh, his little girl must have been so scared. It was all his fault. Why did he leave her alone? Why couldn't he wait until they were home? He was so full of questions. Why hadn't the nurse told him Julia was okay? What did she mean by special case? Kate burst into the room at exactly 4. She was pale, thin, and her hair was a mess. She looked nothing like his usual calm and well-put-together wife. She looked like she had aged in an instant. There were deep shadows under her eyes, and her features had become sharp. And her eyes, they were foreign and terrifying, full of despair and horror. "Where is Julia?" Victor asked first, struggling to sit up on his elbow. Looking at his wife, he wasn't sure he wanted to hear her answer. "She's gone," Kate said, and tears started to stream down her face. "She's missing. The police are looking for her and are questioning witnesses, but they have no leads yet. They found the men who beat you up, and they're under investigation, but they have nothing to do with Julia's disappearance." "That's for sure?" Victor only blamed himself for everything that had happened. Why did he take his daughter to the ponds that day? How could he have left her alone even for a minute? Why hadn't he avoided a fight with the 3 scumbags? His physical wounds healed relatively quickly, but his emotional ones did not. After what had happened, Victor was a changed man. The guilt weighed heavily on him. The police looked for Julia. the whole city and the nearby train stations were covered with her pictures for months. Witnesses came forward who had seen a girl who looked like her with two dirty, scruffy women who were begging in a subway. But that lead went nowhere. Victor and Kate lived in a state of anxious waiting. The uncertainty wore them down physically and mentally. Victor couldn't sleep, and if he did fall into an anxious sleep, he had nightmares. The same thing was happening to Kate. After about a year, his wife couldn't take it anymore. She packed her bags and went to her parents' house. "I can't be in this flat anymore. It's too painful. Her things are here. And you," Kate explained. Victor didn't try to stop her. He knew she blamed him for what had happened to their daughter, and he agreed with her. Who else was to blame but him? Victor was left alone in the empty flat, which had once been so cozy and warm. Nothing helped. Not walking 20 kilometers a day and not burying himself in his work. He couldn't eat. A piece of food would get stuck in his throat. He would think, "I am sitting here in a bright kitchen with a plate of pasta, but where is Julia? What is she eating? How is she feeling?" Victor only started to doubt that she was alive 3 years after she had disappeared, after a fruitless search. By then, he was a shadow of his former self. He knew from mutual friends that Kate had been hospitalized. She couldn't handle the stress. He felt like he was close to the same fate. His salvation came unexpectedly. One day, his neighbor from the second floor, a low-life man in his 40s, came over with a bottle of cheap booze. Victor had a few things to eat, and they drank. His senses were dulled, and the world was filled with new colors. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of relief. The next morning, however, the despair and guilt came back with a new force, along with a terrible hangover. But Victor now knew what to do. He became a heavy drinker. He soon lost his job. Who would want an employee like that? But Victor didn't care. He had a lot of things in his flat that he could sell. Appliances, furniture, clothes. He sold almost everything. He only kept his and Julia's things. In rare moments, he would realize how pathetic his life was. Why was he even here? He was only in his 30s, but he didn't want to live anymore. There was nothing bright or good left in his life, and there never would be. Victor decided that he no longer wanted to live. Only then would he be able to stop suffering. After making his decision, he felt calm and even relieved. Soon it would all be over. One morning, still in a daze from his hangover, he was walking to the local pub when something strange caught his eye. A woman in a white coat was pushing a pushchair. A little boy, about the same age as Julia when she went missing, was sitting in it. A boy and a girl were also holding on to the pushchair, on both sides. The little children were obediently walking along with her. All the children were wearing the same clothes. They were different from other children. They weren't loud and didn't try to run away. They didn't laugh. They looked too serious and sad for their age. Victor, who had thought his heart had become hard to other people's pain, felt a squeeze in his chest at the sight of them. He realized that he was looking at the abandoned children from the nearby children's home. The weather had cleared up, and the carer had taken them for a walk. Victor looked at the departing group in amazement. The carer looked like a hen, surrounded by her chicks. Helpless, abandoned, unwanted little chicks. Their lives had just begun, and they had already faced such trouble. What was in store for them in this world? Who would help them? Who would support them? Victor remembered how much love and care his Julia had received. That warmth was vital for a child. Victor suddenly realized that it was too early for him to leave this world. He could still be useful to someone. He could make someone's life easier and happier. There were so many weak people who needed his help. And here he was, a strong, healthy man with a trade and a brain that could move mountains if he wanted to. It was time to stop wasting his potential on drinking and sad thoughts. Victor decided to turn his life around. His daughter was gone for good, and it was his fault, but now he had a new goal. He was going to become strong, rich, and influential, and he would make the lives of children in need of help better and more pleasant. He quit drinking. It was surprisingly easy. He got a job at a factory again and worked for 3 people, saving money and gaining experience. A couple of years later, he opened his first building and repair company. He hired his old colleagues. He had some savings for materials and the most necessary equipment. That's how his business journey began. He had to learn how to run a business and solve the problems that came up at every step. But he was successful. The company grew stronger and stronger. Soon he had to open a new branch and then another one. At first, his office was his flat, but soon it was clear that he had to rent a separate building. The company was growing by leaps and bounds. The number of clients and employees was increasing at the same rate. Victor started to make money. As a factory worker, he had thought he was earning well, but now he had completely different opportunities. He could easily buy an expensive new car, go to the seaside whenever he wanted, and afford a big house, all at once. But he didn't rush to buy these things. He continued to live in his old flat and drove an economy car. He put most of his earnings into developing the business to have an even bigger income in the future. Every month, he also donated large sums of money to children's homes and hospitals and transferred money to foundations that helped sick children. He also made monthly transfers to Kate's bank account. She had developed a nervous illness that required expensive treatment. He disguised his help. Kate thought she was receiving financial support from the government. Victor wasn't sure his ex-wife would accept money from him. By the way, Kate had remarried a modest library employee, a man much younger than her. They had a son, and it seemed like she was finally getting her life back on track, which Victor was very happy about. But her illness wouldn't go away. He knew all this from mutual friends. Some people didn't understand the successful businessman and thought he was crazy for regularly spending so much money on things that seemed pointless. But most people in Victor's circle respected him for his generosity and kindness. Of course, many women were after the wealthy and successful businessman. Beautiful women of all ages wanted to win over the talented and still young and handsome Victor. But he was indifferent to his admirers. It seemed like his life was all about work and helping people who needed it. Years went by. Victor's company became one of the most successful in the city. His name was on the list of the wealthiest people in the region. Now, he lived in a country house. He liked the area. It was quiet and peaceful. No one was making noise outside his window or using a drill from morning to night. He often visited children's homes, played with the children, assessed the situation, and asked about their needs. Victor looked closely at the faces of the abandoned children. He was especially interested in girls who looked like Julia. Maybe his daughter had been raised in a place like this. Of course, Victor knew that even if that was the case, Julia would be an adult now, and he wouldn't find her there. On one of these trips, Victor met an incredible girl named Christine. She had been a volunteer since she was a teenager, first at an animal shelter and then at children's homes. The staff praised the responsible university student. From what they said, Victor understood that she spent every free minute at the children's home, playing with the children, creating interesting and educational activities for them, and even doing the most difficult jobs, which older people found disgusting, such as taking care of children with disabilities. The head of the children's home said, "A heart of gold like that is a rarity among young people these days. I don't know what we would do without Christine. She's a lifesaver." Victor wanted to talk to the selfless girl. She was very good-looking, tall, with a dark complexion and big brown eyes that shone with compassion and kindness. She was an unusual and very attractive person. She was a postgraduate student studying foreign languages. She wanted to get her PhD. She needed the languages to work in an international volunteer organization. A PhD would allow her to teach and convince her students to help people who needed it. While her peers were dreaming of a good marriage, she was dreaming of working with starving children in Africa. Christine was a very young woman, only 6 or 7 years older than Julia, but Victor felt a kinship with her. Like him, she couldn't ignore other people's pain. She felt for helpless children who needed support. Christine was a very interesting person to talk to. She was very knowledgeable, and her thoughts were wise for her age. Victor hung on her every word. It was clear that she was enjoying talking to him too. One day, Victor realized that he was in love. He had never thought that something like this could happen to him after everything he had been through. He went to sleep and woke up thinking about Christine. He looked forward to seeing her with a sense of excitement. He tried to hide his feelings. He was much older than her and had a lot of baggage. Why would a young, fresh girl want anything to do with all that? She had so many plans and ambitions. Nevertheless, he felt that she was also interested in him. Christine was the first to admit her feelings. They were helping to unload a van full of boxes with baby food for the children at the children's home. Victor had paid for the food. They ended up alone in the kitchen where the director had asked them to put the boxes. "I can't hide it anymore," Christine suddenly said. She looked into Victor's eyes. "You? I think I love you, and I don't know what to do with that." "This is unexpected and very pleasant," Victor said with a smile. Her words made a strong impression on him. He hadn't felt that way in a very long time. "I know how this must look," Christine continued, looking down. "Just another girl trying to get her hooks into a rich man." "Don't say that," Victor said, gently taking her hands in his. "Could you ever think that I would think that way?" "Don't you?" My friend, when I told her, thought exactly that, and she even praised me for my worldly wisdom. "Then she doesn't know you at all," Victor said, happy to finally be able to tell Christine how he felt. "You're the most incredible person I've ever met. You're smart, kind, compassionate, and genuine. I can't believe there are people like you." "I'm far from perfect, but I love you," the girl said. "I've loved you for a long time, and I didn't want to tell you to not trouble you, but it turns out you feel the same way, and I'm so happy." Christine and Victor started dating. They continued to help children's homes, even traveling to neighboring towns. With each passing day, Victor felt that Christine was becoming closer to him. He didn't wait long to propose. She happily said yes. Of course, people talked. They said Victor was toying with a young girl and that Christine was a gold digger and a kept woman. But the couple didn't care. They were enjoying their newfound happiness. Christine had to cancel her planned trip to Africa. She soon found out she was pregnant. Of course, Victor was happy about becoming a father again. But he was also filled with fears that had been dormant. Would he be able to protect this child? What if the story with Julia repeated itself? Of course, Christine knew what had happened to her husband's first daughter. They had been open with each other and tried to have a life without secrets. Timothy was born, and a few years later, Grace came along. Christine decided to dedicate herself to her children. Her career as a translator and her volunteer work took a back seat. Victor was amazed at how much his children were achieving at such a young age. He knew it was all thanks to Christine's hard work and patience. They were planning to adopt a baby, maybe more than one, from a children's home when Timothy and Grace were grown. After becoming a mother, Christine realized how little care and warmth the children in care received from volunteers, carers, and other helpers. She had a new idea: to give at least a few children from a public institution a happy and full childhood. Victor agreed with his wife. He still thought about Julia every day. She was a grown woman now. Where was his daughter? How was she living? After he became a successful businessman, Victor tried to find Julia again. When you're rich, you have opportunities you never had before. He hired private detectives, but it didn't work. Too much time had passed since she had disappeared. There were no leads. Even qualified detectives couldn't find her. That day, Victor came to the office early. He had to finish a few reports before the workday started. He preferred working in the morning, which was why he had left a pile of papers on his desk. The security guard greeted him, and he nodded and went to the stairs. He could hear a shuffling sound coming from upstairs. It was the cleaner mopping the floor on the first floor. There was a bucket in his way. He tried to walk around it. The cleaner, a young woman with a tired face and strands of light hair sticking out of her headscarf, noticed him. She quickly moved the bucket aside so her boss could pass. Victor was used to this kind of deference. Something about this woman interested him. She was so young, so good-looking, and had a smart, open face. He wondered why she hadn't found a better job. "Careful, the floor is slippery," she said, sounding a little guilty. "I didn't have time to dry it. I thought no one would be here yet." "It's fine," Victor said with a smile. And then his eyes locked on something familiar from a very distant past. The cleaner had a silver chain with an elegant key pendant on her chest. This was the exact piece of jewelry he had bought on that terrible day when Julia had disappeared. His eyes were fixed on the pendant. The cleaner felt awkward. She didn't know what to do. Should she continue mopping the floor, or was their conversation not over yet? Victor looked closely at the woman's face. Big blue eyes, a birthmark above her lip, just like his. "It can't be. This can't be happening," he thought. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice raspy. Julia Anthony, she said. Anthony, not Victor, but your name is Julia. I don't know my father's name, the woman said, her eyes wide with surprise. Anthony was the name of the police officer who found me at the train station. The children's home gave me his last name too. Her mannerisms, her movements, her voice, everything was so familiar, but Victor was afraid to believe in this sudden happiness, only to be disappointed. He invited Julia into his office where they could talk in a more appropriate setting. Victor found out that Julia had been found at a train station at the age of 3 in a city hundreds of miles away. She remembered very little because of the trauma. The adults had tried to find out about her family, but they failed. From what witnesses had said, and from Julia's vague memories, a plausible story had been put together. Julia had been born into a family of lowlifes. Her parents had taken her around the country to beg. But when the girl got a little older, she didn't elicit the same sympathy from passers-by, so her parents left her at the train station when she was no longer needed. And this jewelry? Victor asked, pointing to the pendant. Do you remember where you got it? I think one of my parents gave it to me, she said. I had it on when I was found at the station. I've always thought it was strange. It means that at some point, someone loved me. People don't give beautiful things like this to children they don't care about. Julia, Victor said, finally taking a leap of faith. I have to tell you my story. Listen to me, and you'll understand why I'm acting so strange. Victor told the woman sitting in the chair across from him the story of his lost daughter. As he was telling it, Julia grew paler and paler. She nervously played with the pendant around her neck and the strand of hair that had escaped from her headscarf. I'm sure that you are my daughter, he finished. I want so much to believe it. Tears came to Julia's eyes. But I'm afraid of being wrong and being disappointed. I'm so afraid. To be sure, we can do a DNA test, but I don't need one. Victor's voice was shaking. He wanted so much to hug Julia. But he didn't know how she would react. After all, she didn't know him, and she didn't completely believe that what was happening was real. Of course, the test confirmed their relationship. Julia and Victor had already felt it without any lab results. But now they had proof. Victor felt an incredible sense of relief. His life was once again full of color. He had forgotten what it was like to be without the heavy weight of guilt. Julia was here, his wonderful, beautiful daughter. And on top of that, he was a grandfather. He had a granddaughter, Vera. It was an amazing feeling. His daughter had had a tough life. As he listened to her story, Victor felt desperate that he hadn't been there to protect her from all those hardships. But now everything would be different. Julia would not have to suffer anymore. He would finally become a reliable protector and support for her and for his granddaughter. With the positive DNA test, Victor drove to Kate's house. She cried and laughed and hugged her daughter. It seemed like Julia remembered her mother. She held her close and cried too. Kate's health got much better after her daughter returned. Victor gave Julia a job at his company as a personal assistant, a position he created just for her. She was to sort documents and manage his schedule, something like a secretary. At the same time, Julia was studying at university by distance learning. Her life, before she met her father, had been difficult, and she had not had a chance to get a proper education. Now, she was making up for lost time. She loved studying. Julia and her daughter now lived in her father's country house. Vera quickly became friends with Timothy and Grace. The children had a great time together, and the house was always full of their laughter. Christine welcomed Julia and Vera like her own family. She was happy that her beloved husband was no longer tormented by guilt. At first, Victor was afraid to go to sleep. He felt like he would wake up and realize that his meeting with Julia had been a dream. He couldn't believe that such a coincidence could happen. There were so many coincidences in this story. Julia got a job at his company and not at some other one. Victor came to the office earlier than usual and noticed the pendant around her neck. And in all those years, she could have lost the pendant 100 times, but she had kept it and wore it all the time. Without the key, Victor would probably never have recognized her. There are no coincidences, Christine told her husband when he shared his thoughts with her. This is a chain of events. Everything happened the way it was supposed to. If you liked the story, please consider subscribing, commenting, and liking the video.